be in contact with the police. You'd be making sure they hadn't given up. But by this stage, of course, if the child has been missing a decade, it's a cold case, if there's any case at all. So I thought, okay, so if the parent is going to go to cold cases, that's where Rebus works. I knew it. I mentioned it in the final Rebus book, Exit Music, that he would probably apply to join the sadly acronymed SCREW, the Serious Crime Review Unit in Edinburgh. It's a real unit. It comprises 3 retired detectives and 1 serving detective, just as in the book. So I knew that's what, ever since Rebus retired, he's been working as a civilian for the police, looking at old unsolved cases. So now I've suddenly got a story that is going to involve cold case, so why not use Rebus? The second thing was that the cop, who many years ago said to me, hey, Ian, how old is Rebus? And I said, I don't know, 58, 59, why? Oh, he's got to retire at 60. Who just shattered my world, you know. Because I wasn't fed up with Rebus, I hadn't run out of things to say about him. But the books, you know, had got a reputation for realism. Therefore, I told my publisher, look, I'm sorry about this, but Rebus has to retire next year. They went, don't be stupid. You know, just stop the clock. Nobody will notice. You know. Ruth Rendell and P.D. James stopped the clock many decades ago. But I said, no, he's got to retire. Which is why I went and invented another character so I could continue to write crime fiction. But this was the thing. Having invented a character who works for internal affairs, the complaints as it's so called, my cop friend said to me in this telephone conversation, the recent one, he said, we're changing the retirement age. And I said, well, does that mean Rebus could reapply? He said, yeah, he could. I don't know whether he'd get in or not, but he could reapply. I said, well, if he reapplied, would he be vetted? Yeah. Well, who would he be vetted by? Well, internal affairs. Ah, okay. So suddenly it's not just a Rebus novel, it's also a Malcolm Fox novel as well. But it was kind of galling for me because suddenly Fox is the bad guy. I've grown to like this guy. I've 2 books he's been the hero. But doing the job he has to do in this book, he has to be the bad guy. Rebus is the protagonist, he's the antagonist. He's trying to stop this cop getting back into the game. So we don't like him, because that's what he's doing. So that was kind of worrying to me, that, you know, maybe I can't write about Fox in a future book as the hero, having made him basically the villain of this book. The other thing was, would Rebus's voice still be there? So having decided, oh, hey, this could be a Rebus novel, I sat down with a blank sheet of paper and thought, is the voice going to be there 5 years after I last wrote about the guy? So the first few pages were full of trepidation. And it wasn't until he started gasping for a cigarette and stuck a Jackie Leavin CD on when he got in the car that I thought, yeah, he's back. And he bounced out. It was like he was sitting in a little cell, a little compartment in my head, and I'd unlocked the door and let him out to play, and he was loving it. Loving it. And same goes for Siobhan, who hadn't written about in 5 years, and Cafferty, the villain who used to run Edinburgh. They're all back, present and correct.
And with an unlimited future, one hopes.
Well, there's inbuilt decrepitude in everything I do. I mean, even if Rebus were to come back in as a cop, and I don't know if he will, you know, he's still got another retirement age looming. And Fox, I discovered. I mean, when I invented Fox, I made him nice and young. I thought, this guy's got a lot of mileage in him. He's nice and young. Then I discovered that you don't go into internal affairs for your whole professional life. You go in for a maximum of 5 years. So he's got inbuilt decrepitude. So, you know, eventually he's going to have to come out of internal affairs and back into normal CID. Who would he come across? John Rebus.
You know, realism in some ways is your enemy here when you're writing fiction, isn't it?
It is. And you know, I mean, but it's a strength, I think. A strength of the series is the fact that it's a real Edinburgh. Real events will be mentioned. If anything's going on in Edinburgh that I think is noteworthy, I mean, at the beginning of this book, Rebus leaves a funeral, and he gets in his car, and he gets stuck in traffic because of all the road works, the construction work, and that's all for the trams. They're bringing trams back to Edinburgh, having got rid of them in the 50s, and dug up all the lines in the 60s. They're laying lines again. And so it's a nightmare for anybody driving through Edinburgh. So it had to be mentioned. If I didn't mention it, people in Edinburgh would say, how can you write a novel set in Edinburgh and not have the trams mentioned? So yeah, it's also given me a lot of material, though. You know, so that when the G8 conference came to Scotland one year, it gave me a book, you know. Naming of the Dead was set in and around the G8 conference. When the Parliament was set up, that gave me a book, Set in Darkness, about the construction of the Scottish Parliament. So yeah, it's been a bonus, I think. And people now come to Edinburgh looking for Rebus's Edinburgh. In fact, more than that, they come looking for Rebus. And I think they're terribly disappointed when they get to the Oxford bar and find he doesn't exist. And the only poor sap they've got to talk to is me.
Could we digress for a moment and mention your book that you wrote about Edinburgh? There were the photographs.
Rebus is Scotland.
Right.
Yeah. Rebus is Scotland began because there were a couple of photographers I got really friendly with. They had photographed, I'd written a short story for a magazine, and they had done a very moody, atmospheric photograph to go with it. And I showed it to my publisher in the UK and said, this would make a really good jacket. Yeah, that's the cover of Rebus is Scotland, yeah. So the two photographers who had started to do my book jackets, so Flesh Market Close, they took a photograph of Flesh Market Close, and that was on the front. They did Dead Souls, and I forget what else they did. And then he said, look, we've got many, many, many photographs of Edinburgh and Scotland that we haven't managed to use yet. We're going to do a photographic book. Would you do the captions? And I said, well, wait a minute, this is a good opportunity. All these frequently asked questions I get. Where did Rebus come from? Why do you continue to write about Edinburgh? Why is Edinburgh so fascinating, etc., etc.? If I do a chapter and try and answer some of these questions, and you can use the photographs to help me explain it. So it became this really big, lovely photographic book. It's worth, if you can get it, I know it's really hard to find, but the hardcover is worth getting because I think there are about 40 or 50 photographs in there that aren't in the mass market.
Right, we saw tons of them when it came out, but I don't think it's
never
not
been
in print
reprinted.
at the moment.
I mean, it's never been reprinted. No, I mean, it was a very expensive book to make.
Could it be a digital book? Have you thought about that?
I haven't.
Why not?
I've not thought about that. I never think about digital.
Ah.
Never. I mean, like Rebus in this book, someone describes him as a vinyl guy in a digital world. And that's me. You know, if you come back to the hotel with me, I'll show you my suitcase. It's full of vinyl that I've bought this tour.
It was just a happy thought for your fans. There is, however, a Rebus's Edinburgh on your website, which is ianrankin.net, not .com, but .net, in case you want to go look for it.
Mm-hmm. There's also an app, which I think is available in the States. Yeah, there's an app for your Android or iPhone, and it's called Ian Rankin's Edinburgh. And there's little video clips of me, and I show you around, and there's maps, interactive maps and things, and you see the Oxford bar, and you know. Yeah,
it's just like Dashiell Hammett San Francisco, except you're still alive, and they waited till he died.
Isn't that
to
great?
Do that
Yeah, isn't that great? Yeah. I'm so relieved.
Love it.
I mean, there is a Rebus walking tour that an actor runs most weekends. In fact, I think every weekend, and also every day during the summer. And he takes people to the places that I mentioned in the books, and he does readings from the books, and he always ends up, well, no, he doesn't always. He sometimes ends up at the Oxford bar, and he leaves them outside and he said, look, go in if you like, but you won't always get, embraced with open arms, because the barman is the rudest barman in Scotland, and he doesn't like a client. He doesn't want a clientele. He just wants to sit there on his own. Some bar that is. To go back to the Oxford bar for a moment, there was one time I was sitting in the back room reading a newspaper, drinking a pint, and a fan came in. She was Canadian, I think. Came in and she's looking around, and the barman can always tell it's a Rebus fan. They come in and walk around. He said, Ian, they come in, they walk around, they maybe take a photograph, and then they go away again. They don't even buy a drink sometimes. Anyway, she came in, and he said, oh, you're a Rebus fan? She went, yes. He said, oh, Ian Rankin's through in the back room. She went, no. Yeah, yes, he's sitting there. So she came and she had a little look. She went back out again. She said, no, that's not him. And the barman said,
you shaved? Was that the problem?
I don't look like Rebus. I don't look like Rebus. She had an image in her head of what the guy would look like who had written these books.
She'd never looked at your author
She'd
photo.
Obviously never looked at the author photograph. And so she came back up and she said, have you got any ID? And so I had to get credit card out and try and persuade her I really did write these books.
You could make that into a book at some point.
You think?
Yeah.
I've actually met her since. I did a signing in Canada last year. She came along to the signing and said, you won't remember me, but I'm the person who didn't believe you were Ian Rankin. Every book that I write, I'll have told a little portion of this story before probably here, but every book I write, I auction off the right to be in the book to real people for charity. Various charities, maybe half a dozen different charities per book. And they have maybe a dinner or something, or some function, or an online auction, and people, the highest bidder will win. And in this book, there's quite a few. One is a very successful businessman in Scotland, And I said to him, well, I'm going to make you a farmer, I think. You're going to be a farmer who helps Rebus out with a crime scene, to locate a crime scene up in the far north of Scotland. And he said, yeah, that sounds fine. I'm okay with that. He said, the only thing is I've written a book as well. And he said, I'll give some more money to charity if you mention my book in your book. So when Rebus goes up north, he's staying at a hotel in Inverness for the night, and he's got nothing. He hasn't planned to stay, so he's got nothing to read. And there are some books behind the bar of the hotel that have been left by people that have stayed there. And he said, give me a book to read, will you? And the guy goes, what about this one, Cracking the Code? He goes, yeah, I love that. What you don't know is when he gets the book is it's actually a book of business management. So it would have put Reba to sleep quite quickly, I would have thought.
Well, it's easy to see why he was a successful businessman, never missing an opportunity.
But I mean, I love that. And the other nice story I like about that is, and this is going back a bit, but there was a charity event in London, and they got in touch afterwards, said, this guy's paid to be in your book. He wants you to go and look at his website, and then email him. And his name was Peacock Johnson. A really strange name. And I went to his website, and he looked a bit weird. They had kind of Elvis Las Vegas shades on, and a baseball cap, and a loud Hawaiian shirt. And he was talking about his, sort of dodgy, his kind of business practices, and his colleague, Wee Evil Bob. And I emailed him and I said, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with you, pal. I have no idea. And this book was called Question of Blood. And I needed a gun runner, someone who's selling guns illegally. So I thought, this guy's perfect for it. So Peacock Johnson and Wee Evil Bob were in this book as gun dealers. And after the book was finished, I emailed him and said, I really enjoyed writing about that character. I'd maybe write about you again in a future book, The email bounced back, undeliverable. I went to his website no longer existed. So I turned detective and discovered that a band had been playing at this charity event, a band called Bell and Sebastian, fairly well known. Their bassist, Stuart David, a notorious practical joker, whose email address was almost identical to Peacock Johnson's. So I emailed him and I said, are you Peacock Johnson? And he said, yes, I am. I said, so hang on a minute. I thought I was taking a real person and making him fictitious. I was actually taking a fictitious person and making him fictitious. That can mess with your head a little bit. I said, well, I really like talking. I liked writing about the guy. I thought he was a great character. Can I write about him again in a future book? And he said, no, you can't. And the reason for that is, he said, I am now going to write a book about Peacock Johnson. And he's done it. You can find it online. You don't have to buy it. It's not on Amazon or anything. It's on some obscure website. But if you Google in either Stuart David or Peacock Johnson, you'll probably find it. I think I found it that way. It's not a long book. It's the kind of novella length. But what happens in this book is that Peacock Johnson, a small-time crook in Glasgow, is framed for a crime. And he runs home to his wife in a panic and says, I've got to get out of the city, I've been framed. And she said, you should go to Edinburgh and talk to this guy. And she points to the TV. She's watching an episode of Rebus. So he thinks this is a great idea. And he sees that in the TV show, Rebus is drinking in the Oxford bar. So he goes to Edinburgh, he goes to the Oxford bar, and he says to the barman, I need to speak to Inspector Rebus, please. And the barman goes, he's fictitious, he doesn't exist. He said, but the guy who writes the books is in the back room. So Peacock Johnson comes into the back room and meets Ian Rankin, who then helps him to clear his name.
You couldn't actually make that stuff up, could you? It's much better.
It messes with your head. That messes with your head, I tell you. Wee Evil Bob. Who knows about Wee Evil Bob? I don't know. He's just totally fictitious. He wasn't in this book. He wasn't in this book. Maybe I should have brought him back just to show him, just to spite him. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a question about Rebus and Fox and the fact that they both cross the line at certain points, but Rebus does it willfully because he likes crossing the line, and Fox does it because he has to, I think. And yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, Fox, essentially when I invented Fox, I wanted there to be a lot of blue water between him and Rebus. So And to do the job he does, to be internal affairs cop, you've got to toe the line. You've got to obey the rules. You've got to be whiter than white. You've got to work well in a team. You can't be a maverick. You can't be an outsider, etc., etc. And that, to me, meant there was a lot of blue water between him and Rebus. But also stuff like he doesn't listen to music, he doesn't smoke, etc., etc. Just to make sure that readers didn't feel they were getting Rebus with a different name. And so Fox it doesn't like breaking the rules. You know, his instinct is not to break the rules if he can possibly avoid doing it. Whereas Rebus's instinct is always to break the rules because it's fun. And it gets up the noses of his superiors. You know, I mean, he's willful that way. And the only reason he gets away with it is because, you know, I was told a long time ago by the chief of police in Edinburgh that he wished he had one like Rebus on the force. He said there's room for one maverick, one free thinker, somebody outside the box. Rebus almost operates, I would say, as a private eye within the police. He's not part of an investigation team. He goes off on his own and does his own thing. He goes off at a tangent, as it were. And in real life, he wouldn't get away with that. And what annoys Fox is that Fox himself, if he tried that, wouldn't get away with it, and somehow Rebus always has. And that really annoys him.
Doesn't Rebus's solve rate contribute to it as well? I mean, he's generally successful working his
Yeah,
cases.
I mean, that's the other thing is that, you know, he's doing it for the right reasons. He's on the side of the angels. I mean, he definitely is on the side of the angels. And he's always got good reasons for doing it. But in this book, you know, he comes back into a missing persons inquiry, an active inquiry. And the world around him has changed, even in the few years since we last saw him. I mean, someone has to try and explain Twitter to him. And he's going, they do what? With 140 characters? Why would you do that? He just doesn't get it at all. And in fact, the cop who shows him, who explains Twitter to him is a real person who ought to be in the book, who paid charity to be in the book. And the cop that he meets up in Inverness is a real person who paid to be in the book. The previous book, previous Malcolm Fox book, The Impossible Dead, was set in Kirkcaldy, which is a small town in Fife near where I grew up. People say, why did you set the book in Kirkcaldy? Well, somebody paid charity for their restaurant to be mentioned, and the restaurant happened to be in Kirkcaldy. And I thought, how the hell can I get my Edinburgh cops over to Kirkcaldy, which is like 30 miles away, to eat in this one restaurant, the pancake place, to have a delicious cod mornay pancake. And I said to myself, I'll just set the whole book there. I'll set the whole book there. And I got a nice email from the guy who had paid money for his restaurant to be mentioned after the book was published. He said, that was really nice of you to do that. He said, unfortunately, because of the financial downturn, I've had to sell the restaurant. So he didn't even get the benefit of it. I just hope that wasn't the straw that broke that camel's back, you know.
Wow, it would be interesting to see if any of the great golf places around Edinburgh might decide on brand marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Rebus can't play golf, obviously. Well, he doesn't do sports, right? I mean, that's exercise.
Yeah, but you could have a crime somebody did in the bunker or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah. Oh,
Actually, you would kill yourself trying to get out if you're a golfer. I've actually tried to do that. That's when I gave up golf and became a caddy in Scotland, because I actually didn't have the physical strength to hit out of the gorse or hit out of some of those, you know, enormous traps. But I mean, I just thought because there's so many of them around you.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a short story once for an American short story collection. It was all crime stories on a sporting theme. And the obvious one was golf, so I wrote about golf. But it was about some kind of like Chicago gangsters coming to St. Andrews to play golf. And they've never played golf before. They've only played pool. And it was about their missing. I think they go because one of them, the daughter, the kind of crime boss, the daughter is at St. Andrews University looking for a prince to marry. And yeah.
Could I just say, if you've ever tried to putt on one of the double greens at St. Andrews, you're actually better off to lie down and approach it as if it were a pull shot than to try to stand up in the wind. I had to do that. That was another contributing factor to my career as the Scottish caddy.
And I mean, such is my ability as a golfer that if I actually used a putter all the way around, I'd get the same score as I'd get using a variety of clubs. I know that because I've tried it.
What about Siobhan? I thought for a brief moment that after Rebus, you know, had to retire, that you might actually write a book with Siobhan as the lead character. Is that ever?
Yeah, it did cross my mind. But every time I thought about it, I thought there's no way that Rebus wouldn't interfere. You know, I mean, he's not going to let her go. So, but yeah, but then it would cease to be a Siobhan book. I think the problem is his personality is so huge that he overshadows everybody else. And the nice thing, you know, the nice thing about their relationship, when we pick it up in this new book, is that, you know, she's had a few years to create her own sense of self within the police. She's been able to step out from under his shadow. She's been promoted. She now runs her inquiries, etc. And when Rebus comes back, she's in two minds about if this is a good thing or not. Because, in the past, he's always meant trouble. And Malcolm Fox tells her, this could stall your career if you get too close to this guy and he starts breaking the rules and you're there with him when he does it. That could be the end of your police career, or certainly your climb up the ladder. So she's very much in two minds about how close she can let Rebus get to her and to her inquiry. Yeah, I mean, that was quite intriguing. And the same goes for Fox, Fox keeps saying to her, you'd make a really good internal affairs cop. And, come to the dark side. And she's tempted because it's a fast track to promotion, normally, internal affairs.
This is wonderful. I mean, they might as well be here in the room with us. Real people talking. I mean, they have actually become real to you, haven't they? I mean, they do. And
they have, which is why I've never watched the TV versions. Because I think that would spoil it for me. That would sort of, suddenly I would see them. They're in my head at the moment, but they're in my head as disembodied voices and ways of looking at the world. And if suddenly there was an actor, a fixed face and a fixed set of tics and a fixed accent, then that I would lose my Rebus and I would lose my Siobhan. So although I've got all the DVDs on a shelf at home, I've never watched them. I mean, I did a kind of straw poll when Rebus was going to be televised. I spoke to a few crime writers whose work had been televised, and they said it will probably change the way you write about your characters. Colin Dexter, Inspector Morse, was very clear on this. He said that he had changed Morse in the books to be more like Morse on TV because he was so seduced by the characterization of the actor John Thaw. So much so that when John Thaw died, Morse died too. And I didn't want that to happen, which is why I never went near it. Just recently in the UK, a book of mine, Doors Open, which was a heist, a one-off, a heist novel, was filmed. And it was on TV on the 26th of December. And I watched that. I'm hoping it's going to be on BBC America. But I did watch that because I didn't have hadn't the same invested in the characters. The same emotional investment in these characters. They were one-offs. But it was a lot of fun. And it's a nice story, actually, because what happened was, a friend of mine who's a screenwriter, I've known him since university days. He lives in Edinburgh. We were having a cup of coffee together in Edinburgh one day a long time ago, and he said, "Hey, Ian, wouldn't it be great if we did Ocean's 11 in Edinburgh with all the great Scottish actors?" And I went, "Yeah! Sean Connery would be the mastermind, and Ewan McGregor would be his lieutenant, and we'd have James McAvoy, and we'd have And he said, "Yeah, but it couldn't be a casino." No, it couldn't be a casino. No, okay, maybe the art gallery, the art collection. They could rip off the art collection and stuff. And then we started bouncing it around. And eventually got up with a kind of storyline, and he sent it off to some film and TV people who said, no thanks. We've had Oceans 11, 12, 13, we don't need Oceans Edinburgh. So that went in the bottom drawer until the New York Times got in touch with me and said, "Mr. Rankin, we would like you to do a serial for our Sunday magazine." And they said, they wanted a spy story. And I said, well, spies? No, not really. How about a heist? And he went, oh yeah, heist is a good thing. So I got the bottom drawer open, and out came the storyline. And I just broke it down and restructured it and got a 15-part serial. My publisher saw it. They liked it. They liked the characters. They liked the story. They said, can you beef it up into a full-length book? So it was only about 100 pages. I said, yeah, that'd be great, because the characters have little more than thumbnail sketches and the plot isn't well plotted out because they didn't have enough space to do it. So it was published as a book. Do you know who Stephen Fry is? Yeah? Okay. All right. Stephen Fry is dashing to get an airplane in London. And he grabs a book at the bookstore, and he sits down in his plane for a long flight, and he opens up Doors Open. And he goes, this would make a really good movie. Now, he's got some clout in the UK, and he's got his own production company, so they get the movie made for television, Doors Open, with Stephen Fry starring in it, and basically playing Sean Connery, playing my character. But the nice thing, and it was great, I watched it, and it was great, I loved it, it was a very good TV, but the scriptwriter was my friend, who sat in the cafe with me and had the original idea. So it's lovely that comes back right. That circularity almost never works. So it's really nice that he got the chance to write the script.
So it was on BBC. So
it was ITV, which is kind of like, the commercial channel.
Right, because we have something over here. I think those of you who get our e-news, I might have written to you about it, that there is a whole European crime series. It's at MHz. Is that? I'm trying to remember. I think it's called MHz TV. You can get it here on DirecTV and maybe on Comcast. But oddly enough, they have a British series with a woman named Amanda, somebody or other is the lead, and 3 older, retired.
Yeah, it's called Old Tricks.
That's it.
Or New
Old
Tricks.
Or New Tricks.
Yeah, New
which
Tricks.
is very. I was thinking about it when
yeah,
you
I
were
mean,
talking. It's a
played
lot
for
of
laughs.
fun.
It's played for laughs.
Yes, but do you know what? I thought the first one we saw was kind of a shallow plot, and I almost didn't watch another one. But now that I have, they have had 3 or 4 really good stories.
I mean, it is good fun. I mean, people have said, "Oh, Rebus and Cold Case, that's obviously New Tricks," and I go, "No, it really isn't." I mean, I don't really watch it. I've watched it a couple of times, but it's a very different kettle of fish, as it were.
Well, it is. All I meant was that it might be that your story would come over here on that if it doesn't come over on something else.
I mean, I've spoken about this before, but when I watch crime on TV, I'm very jealous of all these Scandinavians, right? Because The Killing got 20 hours to tell one story. Series 2 got 10 hours to tell one story. Some of the French stuff we get, Spiral as an example, 6 hours to tell one story. Rebus on TV was 45 minutes per book. It was an hour, and that was 15 minutes of ads plus 45. So it was a 45-page script. And I just thought, they've thrown out everything. The nuance, the characterization, Edinburgh as a place, the themes that I might be talking about. Let's just get to the bare bones of a whodunit plot. And I thought it lost a lot. So when I got it came to time for me to get ask if do you want the rights back? I said yes, I do. So I've got the rights back, and I'm now waiting. I want one of these Scandinavian style deals.
It's not just that; the Italians can do that too. There was one we watched the other night, Inspector Nardone. No, it was the Montalbano, because those tend to be one per one with Camilleri. It was an Inspector Nardone, I think, and it's Milan in the 1950s. But they had like 2 parts. They had an hour and a half, and then it was too big a story, so they finished it in the next one. So I find Donna Leon, in German, I keep looking at all these Germans running around Venice, and Commissario Brunetti is this kind of squat, kind of, really German instead of the elegant whatever. And I have trouble with that one. But
did you have trouble with Ken Branagh playing Wallander?
No.
No.
Yeah, I like the Scandinavian guy a lot better. But anyway, there might be not just a future for Rebus, a rerun for Rebus, but I was thinking about your standalone might come over on something like that better than.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, BBC America tends to take a lot of stuff from ITV anyway, so they might. I don't know. They might do a deal. They've got Ripper Street at the moment, which you're only like a week behind us on that. It's pretty impressive. I watched the first 10 minutes of the first one. I didn't really get it, but apparently it's worth persisting with.
I haven't tried it yet, although not thanks to the magic of whatever the TV stuff is. But I can't even turn on the TV in our house without assistance, so forget it. But I think Rob is recording it. Could I ask you just one last question about your playlist? Are you updated? I know at one point when you came here on one of your appearances, you had just done a playlist for writing one of the books, and I'm sorry I don't remember which one. Have you gone on and done that sort of thing again, or was that kind of a one-off?
No, you mean sort of letting people know what it is, what the playlist is?
I don't remember. Was it a CD or whether there was an actual
not a CD. Yeah, I think there was. It was
playlist?
I think there was a Spotify playlist or something. Yeah, I don't know. I do it when people ask. It's the internet. I don't get the internet. No, I mean, the laptop I write my books on I have to put coal in the back of it to get it to work, right? It has no internet access. So, when people ask me to do that stuff, if they persistently ask me to do it, I might do it, but otherwise, there aren't enough hours in a day for me to do those playlists. What I did do for this last book, and again, it would be nice if you could see this, and maybe it's on YouTube, I don't know. The BBC, for a 1-hour TV documentary, followed me around while I wrote this book. They gave me a little video camera, and they said, at the end of each day, Ian, film yourself, just explain what you're up to and any problems you've had. And then every now and again, we'll send a crew to Edinburgh, and we'll follow you around when you're doing the research, if you're on a book tour. This interviewer who would interview me about the process. And they distilled it. It must have been about 100 hours. Distilled it down to an hour. From the very first, me sitting with the ideas folder and going through it, to the first day of writing, to me handing it to the editor. Then they interviewed the editor. And stuff like that, and that was a real, and so you get a lot of me getting my music out and deciding what albums I'm going to listen to while I read the book and stuff. And some writers who saw it said to me afterwards, "That's the best film about the process we've ever seen." There haven't been many films. I can't think of any. But they said it was really good. And one of the nice things was they interviewed my wife, and she said, Ian gets these ideas for stories, and then he gets notes, and he takes notes, and does research, and he's got a load of stuff, and he sits down and starts writing, and then by page 65, he's used it all up, and he panics. And it's, she calls it the page 65 problem. I've used up all my ideas and my notes and everything. What am I going to do now? And I've not even got half a book here. And many writers who saw the program said exactly the same. Exactly the same. You get, especially with crime fiction. Think about crime fiction. You've usually got a murder early on. So you've got a crime scene early on. Your cops are then going to do certain things. You will expect them to do certain things, right? Who's the victim? Let's go and talk to the family. Where does the victim work? Talk to the people at work. Trace the last movements, any CCTV we can find, the autopsy, etc., etc. That's about 65 pages worth of material. And by the time you've done that, you've introduced a cast of characters who may show you where you want to go next. And that's kind of what I do. The book tells me where it wants to go next. And it's hardly ever where I think it's going to go. Hardly ever. This book began with a road trip. It began when we wanted to write about this road, the A9, which runs up and down the spine of Scotland. Starts in the central belt, halfway between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and goes all the way up to the north coast, where the only thing you can do is jump on a ferry to Orkney. And I use that road a lot. It's a great road, and it takes you through some amazing scenery. It's also a very frustrating road. But the more I used it, the more I got to know it, and the more I got to, I saw a road anywhere in the world is not just a means of getting from A to B. It has an organic life of its own. And if you pause for just a little while on your route, you'll start to get a sense of that. And sometimes, especially on this A9 road, there are places where if you stop your car and climb over a fence, you could be putting your feet down where no human being has put their feet down in hundreds of years. It's just wilderness. And that's true of lots of roads all over the world. If you just step away from the carriageway for a little bit. So I wanted to write about what a road in itself means. And so this was intended to be a road movie, and that's why Rebus goes up and down the A9 quite a lot. A9 was another possible title for this book. I said to my publisher, well, what about A9? He said, no, that sounds like a brand of barbecue sauce.
Probably doesn't have a lot of meaning outside Scotland to drivers. But is it one of those roads that has pullovers? It's not one of the single tracks with laybys?
It's not quite a single track. I mean, Rebus comes off the A9 at one part of this book and drives around a single track road, which is one of these places where you can drive for hours and not see another car. And I did that, and the TV crew came with me, and I got a little cassette recorder I was talking into, and I was chuckling, saying, at this point in the drive, Rebus will be thinking he's panicking now because he's further away from a bar than he's ever been in his whole life. And that got into the book. I stopped by a lake, a loch in the middle of nowhere. My phone suddenly got some signal. You can almost get no signal there. So I stopped to take a phone call, and I got out, and the crew were filming me. And the person was in London. They were about to go to the opera at Covent Garden. And he said, where are you? And I said, I am literally nowhere. And that happens in the book. Reba stops to take a phone call. He gets out, and he doesn't even have the vocabulary to try and explain the nature of his surroundings. It was a lot of fun to do the research for this book. But no, it's not. But it's a very slow road. It's only from Edinburgh to Inverness is about 120 miles, 130 miles. But it can take you 3 or 4 hours. Because it's a 2-lane road for most of it. And you get stuck behind a lorry. Lorries are limited to, I think, 40 miles an hour. And if you get stuck behind a lorry on this twisty 2-lane road, you can't get past. That's why it's a dangerous road and a frustrating road. Because people then, when they've been stuck behind a lorry for too long, they try and overtake on a blind bend, and they end up crashing. There's been so many crashes on that road. The Nationalist Party, when they got into power, one of their kind of manifesto commitments was to widen it to a proper, 4-lane highway, but it hasn't happened yet. Too expensive.
So you wrote Standing in Another Man's Grave. It published in England late fall, and now it's January. So knowing how publishing works, you probably either are in the middle of or have maybe even finished another book. Yeah, I mean, it was great, actually. The book was published the first week in November, and that coincided with this TV documentary being on. Perhaps that helped because it went straight in at #1. And it was there for 3 weeks. And for over Christmas, from then up until Christmas, me and J.K. Rowling kept bouncing #1, #2. 2 Edinburgh authors, #1 and #2 in the charts in the UK. This week it's still it's number 10 this week, so that's 11 weeks it's been in the top 10 in the UK. It's also my first book to go in the top 10 in the US. It's in the New York Times. I got the paper today, and it's not in today. It's going to be next Sunday, but it's number 9. And I've been in the long list before, like top 15, but I've never been in the top 10 before, so absolutely thrilled. Why this book? I don't know, except Rebus is back, so God bless those of you who've bought it.
But, you know, I've written about Rebus for 25 years, and he's never made it into the top 10 before. So that was a lot of fun. Yes, I mean, to get back to your question, sorry. The normal schedule for me is start getting the ideas October, November, mull them over and start making notes and do the research November, December. Start writing the book the first week of January. Didn't happen this year. Because November, December I was on tour. I toured Australia, New Zealand, the UK. Then took Christmas and New Year off. I knew that I was coming to the States late January. I thought there's no point starting the book. Can't do, because I can't write on the road. My neighbour, Alexander McCall Smith, writes everywhere. I'm very jealous of that. I cannot write on the road. I have to be at home with my Snickers bars, my coffee, my music. So this book is already a month behind, because I don't get back to the UK until the 3rd of February. So it might take me another week to get back on my feet before I start. So, and you know, I'm panicking a little bit. So I mean, you know, I shouldn't be here. I should be at home writing. I'm getting pretty antsy because I've never missed. I mean, I've been doing this job now for 25, 26 years. I've never missed a deadline.
Well, you really are conscientious, because I tried to talk him into coming here because there's like a nonstop from Toronto to Phoenix, and Ian was touring Canada, and I begged and pleaded with him, you know, couldn't you just come to Phoenix? But you just didn't have enough time. Yeah. So yeah. I'm really glad that you could do it
ironically,
this
year it's Canada saying, why are you not coming to Canada this year? You know, you could just nip up from New York or Chicago. You could just nip up to Toronto for a few days. I don't have a few days, you know, because I try and write a book every year. If you try and write a book every year and you do the touring that I'm doing, I added up the weeks of touring. It's about 12 weeks a year, I would say, between all the tours and the various festivals that I go to and stuff. I mean, in March I've got the Dubai Literary Festival, and I've got a literary festival in Denmark. I've got some stuff in the UK in April, so I'm not even getting a clear run when I get back, you know. There's other stuff, other commitments.
Yeah, it's hard to go in and out of a book, and if you can't write while you're on tour, that really does slow you down. Would you like to take questions from the audience? Yeah. If anybody got questions?
Delighted. This lady straight away with her Edinburgh University sweatshirt. Hey. Ah, okay. Flesh Market Alley, yeah. Flesh Market Alley. Here it was Alley, in the UK it was close, yeah. Yeah, there is. I mean, there's a lot. It's a question about U.S. English and English English. I mean, I said to my publisher, "Look, this is a real street in Edinburgh, Flesh Market Close. It's a real street." And so American fans come to Edinburgh, and they're going, "Why is it Alley in the U.S.?" Well, it's Alley because the publisher didn't trust readers to get what a close is. But the first thing that happens is Rebus walks down it. It's obviously some sort of street, you know. It wouldn't have been too difficult for a reader to work out what it is, you know. And you know, I mean, there's been a lot of changes. You know, I mean, they change pavement to sidewalk, and the boot of the car becomes the trunk of the car. Yeah, I mean, Rebus can't wake up in the morning with a fag in his mouth. You know, you got to be.
You certainly can't.
That's a cigarette. It's a cigarette. It's a cigarette. You got to be careful with the razors, which we call rubbers. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff gets changed, but not as much as used to. I mean, there used to be lots of changes, and even, for example, Let It Bleed. My publisher in the US begged me to do an extra chapter at the end because it had a very loose ending. Hadn't tied up all the loose ends, and my publisher said, "Oh, an American mystery reading audience likes doesn't like too many loose ends. They don't like any loose ends." So I did an extra chapter just for the States. So you get the UK edition; it's one chapter short. This new book, my editor in the UK said, I think you should lose the prologue. Get straight to the case. But the prologue was some of my favourite writing in the book. It's Rebus at a funeral, and it kind of sets the tone for the book and tells you something about him, and sort of eases him back into your world again as a reader. So I fought really hard to keep that prologue. You know, it just shows you I've been in this business for a quarter of a century, and apparently I still don't know what I'm doing.
You know, you might call around on your neighbor, because I'm not at all clear that this didn't accelerate with the Harry Potters, because it was aimed at a children's audience. I mean, I read Dorothy Sayers, you know, it isn't translated. If you go in and look. In fact, my favorite thing about a Dorothy Sayers novel, and I don't even remember which one, is there is an entire letter in French, which published in it, which nobody translated because Dorothy Sayers figured that anybody who could read Dorothy Sayers could actually read in original French, and they left it that way. But I think when the children's market, the Harry Potters hit, that American publishers really didn't think that the children were going to be able to figure out if Harry was in a jumper, he was in a sweater, and that kind of thing. And I think it accelerated from them, because did that happen to you as much early on as it may now?
It did. I think it happened more early on than it does now. Yeah, I mean, I think my the person who copy edits my books in the States fights really hard for them not to be too Americanized. She says, you know, people come to these books wanting local color, wanting something slightly exotic, wanting, you know, they don't want an Americanized, sanitized version of what's going on. So she, you know, has been a really good advocate for the books, and as a result of that, I think there's a lot less now than there used to be.
Well, that's really good. I mean, I think personally you guys are up to figuring it all out. But,
Yeah.
you know, that's one reason we have such a big market for your British editions is because so many of you want to read them that way. Anybody else?
Sir? Nobody's going to get that, right? Okay. Do I deliberately put some references in the books that people outside Edinburgh might not get, such as references to Heart of Midlothian football team and in-jokes to do with that sort of thing, that are very local? I put them in because they're fun, and because, you know, an Edinburgh readership will, you know, maybe appreciate that sort of stuff. And if people don't get it, they don't get it. Yeah, I write the books for me. You know, I don't think, if I was thinking about a worldwide audience, there's a lot of stuff I wouldn't do in these books. If I was trying for lowest common denominator, so people in India would understand it, and you know, people in New Zealand and people in Russia and people in Italy, then it would be, you know, a lot of the local colour would come out. And some of it comes out anyway because the translators take it out, because they don't understand it. And if they don't understand it, they just tend to take it out. They don't contact the author to ask what it is. But yeah, but the Hearts one's just a nice joke, you know. I mean, even if you don't know the context, if I'm saying there's a lot of people with foreign names, East European sounding names in that team sheet, you get the notion that there's a, you know, you get a notion that maybe they're owned by a foreign owner, which happens to be the case. At least, does he still own them? I don't know. I've been out the country a week. Maybe he's given up by now. The Hearts have been in financial turmoil for so long that I've kind of lost faith in them. I don't support Hearts, by the way. So there's a whole kind of thing about in Edinburgh you had to support one team or the other, Heart of Midlothian or Hibernian, and I keep it well away from that. Which is why it was really annoying in the TV shows with Ken Stott as Rebus. They made him a Hibernian fan right from the start, and the only reason they did that, because he isn't in the books, the only reason he did it is because in real life the actor Ken Stott is a Hearts fan, and he thought, oh, how funny would it be to have him not only make him a supporter of the opposition, but the first thing he has to do in the opening episode is to go to Hibernian football ground and look really happy to be there. And apparently in an interview on TV, Ken Stott said this was the most difficult thing he's ever had to do as an actor, which is intriguing because he has played Hitler. Anybody else got a question? Yes. Yeah, Rebus doesn't have the best diet in the world, it's true. I mean, there used to be a roll, a kind of filled sandwich you could get in the Oxford bar called a Rebus roll, which was corned beef and beetroot. That was kind of what he ate. It was what I ate when I went in there. Yeah, I've been asked to contribute to cookbooks, you know, like for charity and stuff. You know, can you give us one of Rebus's recipes? You know. In fact, I did one once, and I said it's Scotch eggs. You know what a Scotch egg is? Yeah, okay. It's Rebus's special Scotch eggs. I said, now, go into the kitchen, get a nice fresh organic egg, maybe get a couple of them, boil some water up, and then, you know, put some salt in the water so they don't crack, and then ease them into the pan. You're going to be cooking them for about 4, maybe 5 minutes. Ease them into the pan. Meantime, get yourself a glass of whiskey, just to, something to do while you're waiting for them. Have a nice glass of whiskey while you wait for them to cook. Once they're cooked, drain the water. Throw the eggs away. Keep drinking the whiskey. That's Rebus's Scotch eggs.
I think on that note, we can't improve. We should move on to giving a book away and then to get books signed. Can you tell me, Patrick King up there? Thank you. You want to say, since you have read this Warren Ellis book, it's second novel, I think, by him. A couple words about it, and then we'll pick a winner.
It's an really intriguing kind of. It's like a serial killer. It's a hard killer, and he's got a room. The police burst into this apartment that's almost impossible to get into, and just find all these guns. And each gun has been used once in a kind of famous or infamous crime. And then there's the kind of hunt for the killer. But the killer is a really intriguing character. He's got a lot of Native American mythology going on, and sort of wanders around New York. He's always wandering around the New York of the 1300s or the 1400s before the white man came. Beautifully written, very tense, very graphically violent. Warren is best known as a graphic novelist, as a comic book writer, and he brings kind of some of those strengths to this book. But he's also a very good novelist. It's a very dark book.
It is a dark book, but I thought it was terrific. I'm not a big serial killer thriller reader, but I thought this book had so many interesting things to it that I really loved it. And I know that the publisher is very excited about it, Mulholland Books. So could you pick a number between 1 and 72 that we will give it to? I know I'm blaming you for this.
17, my lucky number.
Ooh.
17.
If you look in your books, is there a number 17? Oh, it's you. Hi. All right. I'll give it to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say that the most important people in the room today, well, we could say it was Ian, but in fact, I'm going to say it's all of you, because if you all didn't turn out and support the events and greet the authors and buy Ian's books, then he wouldn't come to see us, and we'd be terribly deprived. So thank you very, very much for coming, and let's give Ian a round for coming to see us. Now, I actually stayed in this chair for crowd control, also because I don't want to give up my seat. I'm going to ask Ian if he'll sit at this little wooden table. I'm going to ask the first 5 rows of you all here to stand up and fold up your chairs and lean them against the wall so that nobody will get hurt. And then if you could line up by number approximately, starting up here at the edge of the rug and moving backwards, that would be terrific. Thank you all very much for coming. Also, would you please open your book to the page, the title page, where Ian is going to